Just want to welcome you all. This is the first of the winter community lecture series, and I counted it up today, and we're starting our 14th year, I believe. And this lecture series is a weekly event throughout the winter, beginning September, going through about the end of April. Sometimes we squeeze in a couple in May, but things start getting busy around there. We have this sign-in sheet, and we have a new column this year. If you have any suggestions for speakers or in particular films, that's another thing that we have done in the past, and times when we don't have a speaker, if you have any film suggestions that you think would be appropriate, please add those to the list. Just like to take a second to talk about the partnership of folks that put this together. This has really been led by the Science Center Education Department for many, many years. And this year we're happy to have Molly Swartz with the Science Center. She just started. She's from Anchorage, and she's an AmeriCorps volunteer, and she's going to be coordinating the series and doing all the logistics and the advertising. So welcome, Molly, to our community. I think she's been here a week. And she's seen the 24 inches in 2 days, so she hasn't left yet. So yeah, advice is, while you can, Molly, but we sure hope you enjoy your time here. And again, I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks with the Sea Grant Extension Program. I've helped for a number of years. Probably one of the most vital partners has been the Audubon Society, Prince William Sound chapter, and they hold their monthly meetings in this schedule as well. So every third Tuesday or so is the monthly meeting with the Audubon Society, and they also provide a speaker in this series. And then, of course, Prince William Sound Community College broadcasts these live over to Valdez and often up into the basin. And then the real backbone of this partnership, of course, is the Forest Service. We've been using this conference room, this historical conference room I remember when the first time we had one of these, somebody said, "Boy, I haven't been up here since I had to come in for that fishing ticket." So this is a historical spot here too. But anyway, to the Forest Service, 1,000 thanks for not only the use of the building, but for the use of their equipment and connecting up with the college.
Next year, the Cordova Center.
Yes. So the other thing that we wanted to do is just note that starting, we will probably have a couple of lectures here for the remainder of the month on Tuesdays. I don't have those names or those titles yet, but we do have one, and Barclay can, if she has further details on it, on the first Tuesday in October, on the 7th, we have a really exciting visitor in Seth Kantner, the author of Kopchak, who wrote Ordinary Wolves and Shopping in Kopchak, is coming to do a book signing here and to also give the Tuesday night lecture in partnership with the Arts and Pageants folks and with the Science Centers group here to give an abbreviated start time for that lecture. I believe it's going to be here or at the library.
Okay, it will be Tuesday, October 7th from 8 to 9 at the public library because he's here because the Cordova Book Club is celebrating its 20th anniversary. We invited him so we get him for dinner. And then we're going to share them with the world afterwards.
So this venue will essentially collapse down on that Tuesday of the 7th at 8 o'clock down at the library chambers. So without further ado, Mary Ann and the Audubon, please.
So welcome everyone. I'm Mary Ann Bishop. I'm president of Prince William Sound Audubon Society. Lyle is our vice president, Lyle Burcham, and Anita Smythe's our secretary treasurer. We're so glad you're all here tonight. We usually hold a very short meeting before we have our presentation. And before we do that, I do want to welcome our newest potential Audubon member, Henry. I don't want to do this. Can you wave, Henry? Congratulations to Lauren and Brent. And so, Marla, do you want to start with birds? Or?
Yeah. Well, if anybody hasn't noticed yet, Paul's here. That slipped by anybody? Anyway, with it comes a lot of cool birds. It's a time for migration, time for a lot of neat birds that we don't get to see very often to come through, or numbers that we don't see. And we've always liked to kick off this meeting with people's bird sightings. And I'll throw out with a couple, it's not that it's anything rare, but just last week the mountain ash trees in our parking lot were just full of berries. Robins and berry thrushes were just going nuts. I got out one evening and photographed them last Thursday evening. And then our rains started. I guess that didn't deter the birds because they completely stripped the trees of their mountain ash berries, and they're naked now. And I know there's other ones in town. Probably the birds are moving on to them. But anyway, that's a neat sign of fall. And then flocks of sparrows, and of course everybody's noticed the sandhill cranes that have been coming through. Does anybody have any noteworthy, interesting bird sightings, Pete?
Not really noteworthy, but 3 left on one.
Oh, cool. They're an interior and Arctic breeder that just passes through here for the most part.
Somebody gave me some boat kills from 2 nights ago. And it was 4 different species. It was an orange crown warbler, a fox sparrow, a Savannah sparrow, and a yellow warbler. So they were all migrating through the sound and happened to hit this boat.
Anybody else have anything neat? Rocky?
It looks like there was a migrating merlin this morning
Uh-huh.
in Hartney Bay.
Cool.
And there's a bunch of dowagers. It was a little foggy, but they had very long bills.
Uh-huh. At Hartney Bay?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
some kingfishers around too.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've noticed more of those than normal. And I got an interesting story. A couple people will strangle me because of it. But we had a neat visitor come through in August. Because of my connection with the Audubon Alaska Board, I was hooked up with David Allen Sibley, the author of the Sibley Bird Guide, about 3 weeks ago. He came to town, he was on vacation. I asked if he wanted any fanfare. He and his wife were here, and they said no. So I kept it on the hush, more or less, although a few fortuitous people bumped into us. Mary Ann saw us out the road while we were looking at some Harlan's hawks. Krista Hoover saw us at Baja Taco, I think. I introduced him to a handful of people, and then I had Bill and Drew Lindo on the boat with us for a day when we went out to Port Etches and saw puffins and a peregrine falcon and wandering tattlers, and went out to Hinchinbrook entrance and had just a fantastic time. They loved it here. They would like to come back, so we might get to see them again in Cordova, but it was pretty cool to bird with the best. I mean, this guy's attention to detail was something else. So it was a really neat day for me, or a few days for me, spending time with them, and hopefully we can get them to come back sometime. That's about all that I have.
So we don't have we'll have a presentation the 3rd week in October. It might be on the Yukon Delta. We're still deciding.
Yeah.
Or if any of you did something interesting that you'd like to do, October's presentation, or November, or January through May, you're always welcome. Just call us.
Yeah, we like to focus the monthly Audubon presentation on a wildlife-related topic, but it doesn't have to be that. Any expedition, sailing trip or hike or trip to another country, especially if it focused on wildlife, so much the better, is all fair game for Audubon presentations, and they blend in almost seamlessly with the Science Center lecture series. We like to keep our identity a little bit there, but anyway, it's almost one and the same. So.
Okay, before we start, we do have a couple seats here. We can roll them back, and you can sit in the hall, or you can come in. We've got at least
Are those 2 chairs available?
3. We got a couple chairs here, and there was at least one room for one person here. Take these outside or sit up front. There's room next to Maisie there.
Yeah, I'm going to stand all the
Okay, we have just, go ahead and start.
You're going to have to stand.
Okay, we have 2 more seats. Don't be shy. Gerald, come on. Sit down.
This one's got to go.
Okay, I'd like to, there we go. Gerald? Tonight's talk, I've actually been lobbying for over a year, as RJ will tell you. I've been bugging him. I wanted to hear about this trip, and we thought it might happen in February, and then I heard Bob was here this summer through Mark Irving, and Mark gave me the hint that maybe in September, so I called Bob, and the timing was just perfect. He thought his last day of tendering was going to be Saturday. It was actually today. He came in from the Bering River, so we're very lucky he got here on time. I know that Bob is the great-grandnephew, is that correct? Or just the grandnephew? Are you great or just the grandnephew? Great. The great-grandnephew of Cap Bernard, who was a very famous explorer who lived here in Cordova, and he'll talk some about him tonight. So he and RJ made this incredible trip last year, and so they're going to tell us all about it tonight. So take it away.
All right. Maybe we can dim some lights so you guys can have a little bit better resolution on the map. And I'll start off this evening by just a brief myself. Those of you who have not met me or don't know me, my name's RJ Kopchak. I'm a 40-year resident here in Cordova and have been on the water for about 45 years of my life. 35 years fishing out of Cordova. And I met Bob here on the fishing grounds, and he's a Cordovan born and raised. And Bob decided to sell out of his tendering business about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Started talking about this adventure to the Arctic. And he began listening to voices in his head and was so passionate about tracing the trip of the Canadian Arctic expedition that those voices in his head transferred to my head as well, and I offered to accompany him on this particular voyage. And so Bob bought himself a sailboat, and so the Bernard Explorer became the platform that Bob and I were going to make this huge adventure on. I'm going to take us quickly to Chiniga and then have Bob talk to you about both his motivation and our trip from Chiniga on. We got ready in Cordova, but we were in no way prepared to go on the voyage that we expected. There was basically no external pilot house on the boat, and it was pretty poorly organized, but we had to get out of town. And since we'd never been sailing before and didn't know how to sail, we also thought that it would be pretty good to get some sailing lessons. And so we decided to get a couple of professionals to show us how to sail from here to Chiniga. So the boat, the Bernard Explorer, a C-46 or 46-foot long, built in 1967. It was basically one of the prototypes for this world-class sailor, 12 feet wide, draw about 7 feet of water. We had a 96 horsepower Perkins diesel, a KW Kohler generator, and about 400 gallons of fuel, and off we went. Here's Bob on the deck, and you can see behind him that funny looking cabin. That's all, I salvaged that from the burn pile. That's off an old Bristol Bay gill netter. It was the rain shelter on an old Bristol Bay gill netter that was here in town. And we decided we'd make our Arctic shelter out of that. The yard arms were rotten, so one of the first things we had to do was salvage and scrounge timber to clear timber to make new yard arms. We did that, got them replaced, and we thought we were set to go. Folks came down to the boat to see us off, including our friend Taya Thomas, who recently had an adventure of her own. And you can see Taya holding one of the plaques. Bob will talk about the plaques that we brought to the Arctic a little later. These plaques were in celebration of that voyage. Here's our master sailor, Bob Pudwell. He was one of the guys who taught us how to sail. And here's Andreas. He was one of the other sailors, a German friend of Monica's, and world-class sailor. And there's our mascot, mounted firmly to the pilot house. And here we go. Here's Bob telling me that there's got to be some way we can get this beautiful sail rig, but we don't have any. Pulleys in the top of the mast. And there goes the Chiniga on by, and then Bob and the guy say, "Yeah, we really got to get that darn pulley up there." And here's Bob explaining to me that I'm going to be the guy that goes up. And that was kind of in wonder. And so here we go, baby. And I put a pulley up there. And there I am installing the pulley and just loving myself. And then down we come, and there we are about halfway across the sound as we hoist up our sail. This is an illustration of the little boat. I kept an illustrated log as we sailed along. Here's that big, beautiful billowing sail, and it was fabulous. Here's Barkley, who accompanied us on our learning and lesson off to Chiniga. And here's Bob at the end of the sailing lessons, celebrating the fact that we didn't get hurt and we knew how to put every sail up and take it down. Just off Chiniga in the lower left-hand corner, you can see a funny curled fin from a killer whale. I just thought it was way cool. Killer whale went by and had a question mark for a fin. Here we are in Chiniga, just getting ready to get out of there after spending a few days organizing the vessel. I'm going to stop here for a minute and have Bob talk to you about why it was we're going to leave Chiniga Island and head up to Banks Island. Bob, you're on.
Good evening. We started out on a certain date, and I've got to go back in time to explain to you why. The Carlick, which was the mothership of the Canadian Arctic Expedition, left Victoria, British Columbia on June 17th, and they would have been off of Cape Clear about the 28th of June. 24th to 28th, someplace in that. Nobody knows for sure when. Anyway, I set my plans on being off Cape Clear at the same time 100 years later that the Carlick was. So we had a schedule to keep. RJ kind of threw together with the boat, but under no stretch of imagination did him or RJ or myself ever once set out on this journey not knowing what we were getting ourselves into. I studied that boat for a long time before I ever bought it. I had other options I was going to do, but when I read the history on the Bernard Explorer, which used to be the Wolverine owned by a local man here, Harry Kern, the history showed me that boat was built to be a motorboat / sailboat, which for me meant a lot, because I had no clue on how to put a sail on when I left Cordova. Matter of fact, when I see a sailboat laid on the side, I don't want to put a sail on. I'll let you do a keel. So we made the decision that Bob Cuddy will help us to the point where it was safe for us if we had to use the sails. But I always knew, in which we did for 1,400 miles to Nome and another 1,200 miles up to Franklin Bay, we used the motor. We motored the whole way. We kept the sail up for stabilizer. We thought you can't live on a boat that's locked too much. We did do a little sailing just to be for safety's sakes, but no stretch of imagination could we ever plan on sailing to Nome.
The sails added a couple of knots onto our speed, which was really helpful. But as Bob said, we were motor sailors with motor understood.
Yeah. So anyway, Carlick made it to 24th of June, and he made it to Nome on the 8th of July. And that's what we set our start for, on about the 8th of July, was when we wanted to get there. Which we held within 4 days, but when we left from this picture you see right here, it was blowing westerly, and it blew westerly for the next 9 days, all the way to Falls Pass, which I don't know if you ever made that trip, but that was 9 days, pretty much up and down, day and night.
So I'm going to run some slides on that, but we got our butts kicked right from about this moment until Kodiak, when we could hide for a while and not get our butts kicked. But we were heading north, by golly, that was our intention. First we had to go south, we hit west first.
Thinking the whole time that we would get through Falls Pass, because I fished out in that country. I got a good experience out in the country for 20 years. I fished out in the ranch field and have a pretty good idea what goes on out in that part of the world. So I figured we'd get through Falls Pass and be on our stern up to Nome. We got it made. Wrong, got through Falls Pass, then switched the other direction. We bucked our way up to Minnetonka Island and then on up to Nome.
So our intention is we're following the route of the Canadian Arctic Expedition. It was the largest scientific expedition mounted to date in 1913. One of the vessels involved was the Carlick. The Carlick ended up getting stranded in the ice, drifting for a year, and ended up being one of the most interesting stories of Arctic adventure and survival. Kind of memorialized in a book called The Ice Master. But when you read about it and the epic trek made by Robert Bartlett, 700 miles across frozen ice and tundra, from Wrangel Island off of Russia to Nome to Mount Rescue, it's quite a fulfilling story. Anyway, off we went. So here's Bob kind of hanging out on deck, And after we got our butt kicked for a while and made it through the Kodiak, where are we at, Bob?
At King Cove, the Cannery Peter Pan plant at King Cove. Stopped in there to get, forget what he needed, what he was stopping, other than just a break.
So here's the little harbor there. I was fascinated by these places. We saw on our way a whole bunch of public. So I kept trying to get illustrations in our kind of journal about some of the wildlife and birds we saw along the way. Inspired here, of course, by some great books we had on board. They wouldn't hold still long enough for me to do these portraits. Here's Castle Cape, a phenomenal place that we're on our way here to. I'll remember.
That was from Sandpoint to Chignik.
There we go, Sandpoint to Chignik, right around the 4th of July. I knew that, Bob. I knew that because we're in the log here. Anyway, yesterday's blow. Every time you read a page in the logbook, you'll learn a little bit more about yesterday's blow. Here we are anchored up in Chignik. And those three, there's a couple of vessels tied up behind us. They came over and introduced themselves, asked us what we were doing. When they heard, they thought we were stock rating mad and crazy and said, hey, have you ever tasted a Chignik red? So they threw us a brand new fresh red. I'm going to tell you right now that the only reason the Copper River isn't equated to Chignik reds is because they're out of cycle and they're competing with other fish. But those were phenomenal fish, fat, red, and tasty. Anyway, we had a great time in Chignik. And again, there's Castle Cape on our way by. What a magic, dynamic, rough landscape the whole way. I was just fascinated with it. Small town 4th of July festivities. Sandpoint. Next one up the line. Here we are trying to cruise our way up towards Falls Pass. King crab pots piled everywhere. Here's the harbor master's shack with the alcohol low standards and poor decisions plaque right there. So you know you're not over at Oath anymore. We'd add a couple to that. Great folks. They treated us well. They dined, and shared their harbor. This is what was fascinating to me. Just how incredibly dynamic these landscapes were as we went by the volcanoes and that incredibly
And they have the weather where you see it.
yes, fractured landscape. This guy here had fallen asleep. I just was fascinated by the fact that the boat had made it back to town. They didn't make it back to town the same day he ran it down.
The boat was 2 months old, by the way.
We met these folks underway, talked to them a couple of times. They were a Canadian couple. They were on their way to the Falls Pass, so they were going to turn around. They found out we were going all the way to the Northwest Territories. They gave us a bottle of wine that they were saving for their celebration to celebrate our celebration. This is fabulous, by the way. We appreciated it. They had a great day. Here we are on our way to Falls Pass. These, again, the fabulous volcanoes and dynamic landscapes just everywhere. Big boys going by on their way to work. Us on our way into the pass here pretty much. As you can see, there's our stream making 8 knots on our way through Falls Pass, heading to the Bering Sea. We just passed there in an interesting rig on a sailboat. I didn't quite capture it, but it had yardarms off both sides and it had squared sails basically on each side and went flying by us. It was phenomenally fast. Didn't look like it had a motor on board. Anyway, that was fascinating. On our way, we stopped and made plankton casts. I brought some formaldehyde for preservation, and we'd stop every so often to see what was below the boat and what we might see. So here's Bob cranking away on one of our plankton casts. He's working up on deck again. Basically finishing up, I think we were patching in. That's our little cabin, and the blue parts are, we salvaged some visqueen off the boat and were able to enclose our little driving cabin because it was getting wetter and colder as we continued to go north. So we closed it all in, and that was our above deck, but somewhat protected driving station. You can see it there. So yes, nothing but professional. We're all professionals here. On top of the cabin, you can see screwed down were plates of flexible aluminum and plywood, just in case we needed to do any patching. We were fairly well prepared when it came to emergency equipment and tools. So we felt good about that. Out of the plankton were just, this I put in just to show you, there were these fabulous little, look like egg sacs that you see illustrated in the lower end there. And I was just fascinated. Of course, we went without a microscope, so we were only able to bare eye our samples. But it was interesting to see the diversity of critters depending on where we put the net in. How some places were like deserts and others were like tropical forests when it came to life. Here's our plankton sampling net coming up somewhere in the Bering Sea. So here we are past Unamak and on our way to Nelson Island and Cape Romanzoff. This was
RJ, this was about the time that I got up. RJ was coming off the watch. It was daylight. He told me that he had seen a ship off to our port side, but it was strange, it had no lights on it. It was just a big square box. But 4 hours later up the line, a submarine surfaced right alongside us on the starboard side.
no, that's right. It was so weird because all night long I would see these lights and then the lights would disappear. And I'd see the lights and then they disappeared. This thing was coming up and going down. It was just, anyway, it was great that Bob finally saw the submarine. I thought I was hallucinating. 60s revisited. Yeah, who knows? Here we are coming up on Cape Vancouver, Nelson Island. I started trying to, in my sketchbook, just like old mariners did, capture the shape and look of the headlands just for something to draw. Because mostly we were just cruising by landscapes. So I did a series of these capes. We ran into a whole bunch of birds. Yeah, I know all you Audubon people.
Could you be more specific?
The only thing I know about the Audubon is it's a great road system in Germany.
These birds had wings.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. We saw many, many piles of birds like this.
Sure waters.
So just it was, to me, that was fascinating. The density of the bird population was great. So cruising along, you can see that red line. We ran down the middle of the boat. We had a rule: you don't go on deck without being tied in. This was one of the few good days that we experienced. When we got off of Cape Romanzoff, we're about 10, 12 miles offshore, and all of a sudden an open skiff pulls up alongside, full of like these 4 people, 3 women and a guy. Guy yells out, "Hey, where are you guys going?" He said, "We're going to Nome." "Where are you from?" he says. "We're from Cordova, Alaska." And he says, "Where's that place?" We tried to explain to him where it was, and he says, "Come to the village, have dinner." We said, "We're on a schedule. We're heading to Nome." And we're going straight towards Nome. And he says to us, "Oh, no, Nome. Go out that way." And "No, we're in a hurry. Nome." I like that, man. We can see it on the chart. We go, "Nome." Nah, Nome's not that way. We ignored it. So there they are. They were just wonderful, not a life jacket among them. Again, 10, 12 miles offshore is too much. So anyway, we went exactly as we told them we're going to go from Hoover Bay. We're going straight to Nome. That was the dumbest thing we could have done. Local knowledge means a lot. And it's really shallow this close in. About another 15, 20 miles offshore, you hit deep water. So Bob went to bed, and I got my butt kicked for about 6 straight hours trying to get across that bay.
Never sound bad.
Yeah, it was just snotty. But anyway, another one of those stormy nights where we ignored the local knowledge. We promised ourselves never to do that again. And headed to Nome. And speaking of Nome, there's Nome, Alaska, an interesting harbor. When we were pulling into Nome, what went by but a boat called the Mummy Mist. Yeah, anybody that was here in 1974 would remember that a guy named Joel Iwataki built the Mummy Mist along with another guy, Art Newman, built the Sardonicus. Little tiny boats that fished out of Cordova. One of them was king crabbing out of Nome. Anyway, pulling into Cape Nome, just another sketch of the headlands there at Nome. And here we are in the Nome Harbor. It was fascinating because there's that Mummy Mist docked up a little later. It's tiny, and you can see how they built it up to try to fish up there. I was impressed and mystified as to why anybody would do that. Hanging out in the Nome Harbor, this is Paul Chetcha. Paul joined us in Nome. Tell him who Paul is.
Paul's a professor at the University of Fairbanks. of music. I believe he wrote his thesis on the effect that music had on the Eskimo, Inuit, West Coast, North Coast, Alaska, and Northwest Territories. He was really infatuated by Uncle Joe's story. Matter of fact, he knew more about the man than I did. I lived with the man for about 20. But Paul was just so dedicated to the whole thing. It was his lifetime dream to do something like this, so there was Paul.
He studied Arctic music and dance, and the Arctic expedition of 13 had such a huge and pronounced influence on the villages in the far Arctic that it became a subject of song and dance. And through his exposure to that, Paul really did just totally jump into the history of the expedition and brought along with him some of the old logs of both whaling, copies of old logs of whaling vessels and Joe's logs, which later on in the voyage would prove invaluable when we were trying to find shelter from the storms in the far Arctic. We were utilizing 100-year-old whaling logs to look for the best little place to tuck behind, thanks to Paul. It was quite a deal. So he'd never sailed before. That was his first trip. When you guys recognize John, he was our guide in the local character fished out of here for quite a while. He went to Nome about 10 years ago to be a gold miner. And took us around to Nome. He also invented gold harvesting equipment. Down below you'll see a sketch of John's big suction dredge that he was building out of a huge heavy equipment tire rim that was about 10 feet in diameter. And this was the way he was going to become a millionaire. John had 5 or 6 projects in various stages of repair and disrepair that were going to make him $1 million. We also saw folks with rigs that were making millions of dollars. These are things that drive out into the flat ocean off of Nome and dig up the gold-bearing gravel and run it through the separator up above and sift gold out of it. So we saw all kinds of those machines, and they were just fascinating. Here's one of the floating dredges. Very, very fancy one, doing the same thing, just sucking up gravel in shallow water off of the beaches in Nome, and many of them are making very, very good money at it. Here's John with one of the old gold exploration machines as he was showing us around the derelict spots around Nome where the industry had gone boom and then bust, and now again is in a boom period. Fascinating. So away we go. We're going to leave Nome, and now from Nome we went to the little Diomede Islands, and Paul was traveling along with us. This is a funny story because we were just coming up on the Diomedes, and I'm telling Paul, we have gotten our butts kicked the whole way. Thank God the weather's laying down. And it got really nice. We got just past the Diomedes and just past the Cape here. And what were we, about 10 miles, 15 miles?
I don't know if you recall, I was sick. I was in the monk with you and Paul.
Oh, that's right. And then it started blowing a little bit right after we got through the point here. And then it started blowing a little more. And then Bob said, "You think we should take the mainsail down?" And it was, of course, too late to really do that well. But yes, we got the mainsail down. 50 to 70 knots of wind out of nowhere. Absolutely harrowing experience. We beat our way back to what's called Tin City, where you see those 2 little objects on the beach. They were part of a fish camp. Tin City is a place that has been exploited just since the turn of the century. And we hunkered down there. It was so rough and so scary. For just a little while, I had sewing machine leg. That's when you get so much adrenaline in you that your legs start shaking like you're powering a sewing machine. But anyway, made it through the night, and off we went. There's Bob plotting our course in the situation room. There's always a situation trying to get our course plotted. So here we are on our way up and around the corner. Bang, bang. We were just about to run into these guys on the 21st of July just coming up off Point Barrow. We ran into the ice, and the ice ran into the walrus. It was just the beginning of it. This one's out of order, who cares? So here's the ice coming up, and these are the guys we saw on the ice, and it was my first experience with walrus, whether they were in a cage or on the ice, and it was just fascinating.
They weigh probably about 1,500 pounds apiece. Look at how many of them can get on an iceberg and balance it.
It was just phenomenal. It just piled on a little chunk of ice. How do they do that? So this water was so thick and rich, it was like a plankton soup. And in and amongst the walrus, they were feeding whales, bowhead whales. It was just absolutely magic seeing these big guys. And just run through them. But it was, to me, one of the most exciting times that I've ever shared in my life with animals. Just being up and near these great big things. Here's one of the whales that were out feeding. We never really got close. They were just gentle, though, just kind of surfacing. And this picture, there were probably 20 whales within visual sight of this one, and many more that we passed through the day. But this is what we started getting into, ice. And our direct track to Barrow was interrupted, so we had to make it into shore to a place called Skull Cliffs, which is that line that you can see along the side. According to Uncle Joe's diaries, there was a gut just alongside the cliffs, and then a high spot, and the ice would hang up on the high spot. And if you could make it to the cliffs, you could cruise right along the cliffs up towards Barrow. So we were able to work our way through the ice and get up to Skull Cliffs, where we actually put the anchor down for the night. This is one of the storm fronts that we continue to encounter. That interesting looking half or quarter circle on the left. We found out that the summer we were in the Arctic, it was the summer of more frequent recorded cyclic events in the Arctic. Never had there been more of these big cyclonic storms than the summer we were up there. One of the things that it did is, even though there was less pack ice, it ended up breaking up and moving the flow ice into places where at this time of year usually you wouldn't encounter ice. So we just ended up encountering ice. It became our friend. We were just coming out of Skull Cliffs, and this is Barrow. We were hoping to pull into Barrow, but there was no way, it was iced in. So we pulled past Barrow and threw the hook down and ran. We met these guys we called them Hans because they could speak no English and we could speak no German. So we simply communicated with hand gestures as to whether we were going to go someplace or not. But these guys could sail that little boat in circles with no motor. They would grab handfuls of sails on one side and pull them one way or the other. And I'd never seen anyone work a boat so efficiently as these guys. It was an all-steel lap straight constructed boat designed specifically to make the Northwest Passage. They were interesting guys. These are the folks from Barrow who were trying to figure out who in the hell is anchoring sailboats in the bay. So they dried out the long spit and the pickup boats. We had many of them to check it out. That's where the range dives into the ocean, or the Brooks Range dives in towards the ocean on the end. And here we are, kind of with our little mascot, enjoying the area. It reminded me a great deal of the Copper River Flats, with the mountains in the background and the sinewy river system. Although there wasn't the grasses or the kind of brush, the landscape itself was very reminiscent of how the Copper River Flats works. We saw more and more ice and incredible displays of both storm clouds and 24-hour ice. We are passing one of the first oil rigs, offshore oil rigs that we saw. And there, so you see us kind of off the Colville River and heading towards Flaxman Island. Another one of the, got a lot of these storm fronts that we can introduce you to. The storm front kind of, they were just so dynamic, and it was so beautiful to see the way the light worked. You all are familiar with David Rosenthal. Oh, here we are. This is what we do. We hang out with Harry Kern's. Harry Kern left this 25-year-old radio on board. It was the only thing we could use to get music sometimes. So we got really adept at rigging the antennas. You can see it kind of go through the whole top of the cabinet. And getting that battery-operated radio to work. I rigged a bunk so I could be up high enough to see out of the cabin, but horizontal was excellent. During a storm, we had to pull in, this is one of the places Paul helped us find.
Collison Point.
Collison Point. Big storm, lots of ice flowing really hard around us. We pulled into this place called Collison Point. It's one of the things that we recognize about the Arctic is the fact that there are no trees, but there's lots of wood.
And this is where the Canadian Arctic Expedition spent their first winter with both the Mary Sachs and the North Star, which were ahead of the Carlick. They made it here to Collison Point. This is where they set up camp for the first year with my great-great-uncle Peter.
So we saw lots of logs, lots of wood in the water, everything coming out of the Mackenzie River and or over from Russia, but my assumption is the way the currents look to be working out of the Mackenzie River. So a treeless society with lots of wood. Working on deck, getting ready to launch the skiff. We went ashore at Collison Point a couple of times where there were just these fabulous patterns of rocks and twigs and more twigs. I just love these shapes. I thought I'd share them. And wood stacked up to make wind shelters for subsistence camps. So we left Collison Point and headed on to past Kaktovik, and you can see Herschel Island, that's part of Canada. The red line and yellow line, that's the direction we'd like to be going, towards Banks Island. The red line is a second dream, and the way the boat is pointing is how we have to go because of the ice conditions. We talked to the Canadian Coast Guard about here, and they asked us about how our tolerance for ice was.
And what did you tell them?
Find out. So it got really sloppy again. It was funny, but I think we mentioned the fact that the weather was really horrendous the whole way. So just another sketch saying it was horrendous. But in addition to that, there was this light. So David Rosenthal has always told me that the Arctic light is what draws him, the Antarctic light. And I didn't understand it until I went to the Arctic and saw 6-hour sunsets and 6 hours of painted beautiful sky, not 40 minutes or 30 minutes. And I totally understood why he's so fascinated with the Arctic and Antarctic environments. It was just tremendously impressive and beautiful. But this was our constant companion as we continued to try to work our way towards Banks Island, and it really was this thick. And we were weaving our way through areas that were just a little wider than the boat and just about long enough to turn. And every time we'd see an open lead, as you can see just beyond on your right, we'd think we're going to finally get out of the ice, and we'd proceed some more. We had built this add-on driver's seat to be able to sit up high enough to get better perspective on the boat, be a little more comfortable, because it was really difficult to steer from inside. So this was part of our handy-dandy at-sea carpentry boat modification program. So here's our mascot overseeing this incredibly dense ice and the fog. When the fog came in, it got to be really daunting because you couldn't see far enough to really pick out a good course. And the ice came in every shape, and some Mickey Mouse looking, Donald Duck looking. It was fascinating. So here's our buddy Paul. This is where we ended up in the ice. We were going nowhere. It was all over. Bob turned it around. As you can see, our track, we traveled about half the distance to Banks Island in about 10 miles. Unable to weave our way through the ice, and admitted that this was not going to happen, and we're going to turn back around and head out. So we headed to a little village called Kaktovik, which is the farthest eastern and farthest northern inhabited place in Canada, or in the U.S. I mean. Barter Island has been a place of trade and barter for thousands of years. And it's just this tiny community that's totally subsistent. So here's Bob and I and Paul at Barter Island. Here are the folks drying seal meat and just a little Arctic town. This is the thing that the town is based on. Wales, Kaktovik, Wales. The little village center. I love the painting of the city hall. And this is an aerial view. Upper right-hand corner is Bernard Harbor, where we spent
Bernard Spit.
Bernard Spit, named after the ancestors. This is what the beach there looks like, and they were just beginning to set up their subsistence camps for the whaling season. They were going to be going after these guys. It's a bowhead whale. We saw lots and lots of them. It was very cool. This is what they look like after they're dead. And again, just Kaktovik. Here's Bob with one of the villagers. We stopped in at the village office, introduced ourselves, talked to them about our need for fuel. Bob will talk more later about becoming an honorary citizen. Here's Bob hanging out with the polar bear patrol because they are all over Kaktovik area. And when we got back to Kaktovik, I had another commitment to take, so I had to fly home. So here I am at the Kaktovik airport, flying out and heading home. My memories are grand of this part. This was my favorite bird knowing. I like the parasitic jaegers. So I drew a sketch of them. And that.
Do you know a bird name?
I do. That's one. I knew actually two, three actually. I got the puffins right too. Anyway, that was the first kind of push of the trip. Bob's got a little bit more of the history of this effort, and so we'll, with Milo's great assistance.
Okay, what do I do here, RJ?
There you go, up and down right there.
Everybody gotta show me everything.
No,
Okay, before, when I first decided to do this expedition, it didn't just happen overnight. It was a 20-year process for me to get to the point where I was when RJ and I left it over. And it started with my Uncle Joe, growing up with him, not really hearing much about Peter Bernard. When I became an adult, a cousin of mine was infatuated by the story. She got me interested in it. In a 15-year period, I did a lot of research on the Canadian Arctic Expedition and the fate of the Karlik. But we didn't tell you about the Karlik when they left Victoria in July. The following August, 16 young men were dead on that boat because of the way things were put together. Jennifer Nevin's book, The Ice Master, she pretty well records what went on in Victoria. And one of the things that caught my mind was Stephenson, the leader of the group, was supposed to go to the factory where they made pemmican. And pemmican is what feeds the dogs and the animals. You've got human pemmican, you've got dog pemmican. And it basically looks like a rice cracker with hair sticking out of it. And that's the human pemmican. The dog pemmican don't have hair sticking out of it. That's what I see. But the pemmican was bad, and Stephenson knew this, but in a haste to get out of Victoria, and the reason for his haste was, when he went to Victoria, he was under control of the National Geographic Society and the American Museum. They had funded his expedition. They bought the Karlik, they crewed the Karlik, they did everything, sent it to Victoria to have it provisioned to head to the Arctic. When he was in Victoria, he went to the Canadian government, got them to fund the expedition, not telling National Geographic Society. So by the time the attorneys got it settled, he had to be out of town by June 17th, or the expedition would have went back to National Geographic Society. If that had happened, the sovereignty of the Arctic would not look like it is today. The reason it is like it is today is because of the Canadian Arctic Expedition, 1913 and 1916. Okay, that said, they left out of Victoria with a promise when they got to Nome, everything would be taken off the ship, put back on in the order that it should be, instead of all the good stuff that you need on the bottom, which never happened. The pemmican was never recorded bad, but it was taken out, put on the North Star, and my uncle, great-great-uncle, both the Mary Sachs, and they took it on the southern party up past where we were at, past Franklin Bay. That was another part of it I won't get into. But the pemmican stayed aboard the Mary Sachs that went over to Banks Island, to Cape Kellett. Now the reason I keep talking about this pemmican is because when Peter's partner's body was found on the ice, there was a note that says the dogs are dying. They're down to 10 dogs. And they still don't know what had killed Charlie Thompson, Peter's partner, but they knew for a fact the dogs were dying. Excuse me. They followed Uncle Peter's tracks back to the northwest tip of Banks Island when they lost his tracks. Nobody ever knows whatever happened to him, how he died or whatever. He might be living up there for all I know. That was one of the reasons I wanted to go up there, to check it out. Because after 100 years, folks, that country up there still, nobody's been up there. The locals don't go up there because it's such a river drainage, you can't just ford all these rivers to get there. You gotta go by boat. And that was what this guy, when he brought this up from Vancouver, was trying to do. And he was gonna go crab fishing up there. That's where the boat stayed. So anyway, Uncle Peter died up on the northwest tip of Banks Island. 16 guys died on the Carlick, all in the Canadian Arctic Expedition. So in 1926, in Vancouver, they voted to state a plaque, I guess for the way you'd say it, to honor these people that died, including Uncle Peter and Uncle Peter Charlie Thompson, his partner, were on this plaque. In 1976, they had a fire in the museum. When they were refurbishing the new museum, the board, as it was told to me, scrapped the plaque. And that rubbed me wrong. I thought, how can you scrap a plaque that honors dead people that went before us? To me, that didn't make sense. So I started doing a little more research, and I found out that inadvertently they had canceled the full significance of the Canadian Arctic Expedition. And once I got that information, I went back talking to the Museum of Civilization in Quebec. They were backtracking really quick to see what was going on because nobody knew this had happened. 2010, they figured out that the Canadian Arctic Expedition, as far as the history books show, it never happened. So Canada backtracked a whole bunch, figured out what they had to do to reinstate the significance of the expedition. But my part that I wanted them to do was reinstate the plaque, which they would not agree to do. They agreed to make a plaque. They wanted me to bet that just commemorated the expedition itself, all the good it did. But they missed, my point was the plaque to honor the dead men. We owe it to them. We should never, as a society, take something like that away. There's no reason for it. So that was what was driving my inner thought. So anyway, to do that, I figured I got to go to Banks Island. Now, being a sailor, I know for a fact, if you're going somewhere by boat, it's a lot easier to get there if you've been there before and you know what you're getting yourself into. So in February, I flew up to Banks Island, picked a full moon, and spent 3 weeks of entertainment for this village for 3 weeks, which was pretty neat. They were great people, 120 of them, 400 miles from the nearest human being, and away we went. How do you put it here?
Nope, the other direction. There you go.
Okay, that there is Mary Saxony, that's my boat, Banks Island. So look at there, go get ice for the elders, that was kind of cool. There was my living quarters, more expensive than, yeah. That is Sachs Harbor from the highest point looking down. Sachs Harbor from the ice looking back at it, that's it. So all you see is, that's where the people live, that's it.
So we were supposed to meet an expedition of scholars in Sachs Harbor to be their floating hotel as we went from an among archaeological sites. So anyway, that was one of the frustrations for Bob. There were folks waiting for us in Sachs Harbor who were hoping to be able to visit some of the old camps from the Arctic expedition.
That's one of the original dogs brought to Banks Island in the 40s. That's one of the offspring of it. That church I seen when I was doing my internet research on Sachs Harbor, and it really caught my mind with that bell there. I wanted to see it. And I also thought to myself, I better bring up stuff for entertainment, so I brought food coloring spray bottles. Got the kids there next morning this morning. And they were having a good snoring. That was the best place to stay when you're in the Arctic. You get thrown in jail, you're warm, you get fed, everything was good. This was inside the church. Nobody in that village had been in this church for 25 years, I think it was. They had bad memories of it, so they got out of it. They just locked it up and walked up. But I got the keys, got permission to go in, to go up on the roof, fix the bell, blah, blah, blah. And that's the inside of the church. That's what I went looking for right there, those are range markers. Line those two things up by boat and come in on the range. That's what you see that for probably 6 to 8 miles out to sea, you could see that. That clear day. So I knew there was range markers there. Nobody in the village knew what they were. I could explain it to them. Roger Kuptana, he'd been on one of the first families to move off the ice onto the island. His family did. He had the honor of ringing the bell for the first time. That's his wife Jackie tried to talk me to put the surplus on, but he wouldn't go for that one. That caught my eye, local art. I thought that was kind of neat. That's more local art. They do that, they're running a needle soot on the thread through their skin, underneath their skin, and pull it through. That's how that done. That lady could bake bread faster than I could smoke a cigarette. She was amazing. There's lots of plant life up there in the middle of winter. This is February. Everything was growing. That's Roger Kuptana. He took me out on the ice. We camped out for 3 days. I wanted to go out and see what it was like to live conditions that my uncle went through. That what was assessment never want to do it. I'll be honest with you, as long as you're with a man like Roger Kuptana, it's fun. That's looking down the village. That's how you get back and forth. That's that one right in the front. That's my main man, RJ, who I can't say enough. Thank him enough for doing what he did on that trip, because it made it possible for me safely. These are going to run through real quick because these are just retakes of some that RJ did have on his, and I didn't have time to get them. There's folks down here in Cordova Harbor, that's Whale Pass, Kodiak, going through there. You've seen that one. That's a nice one. RJ doing his thing. 4 Falls Pass. 2 Falls Pass. This is the Bering Sea. It was a nice night. Beautiful night on the Bering Sea. Couldn't beat it. You dream about it. That's the people laying it down. That's what RJ told me. He was looking out the window behind me and he said there's a skiff out there. I thought he was crazy. You know, can't do it real well. This is one RJ didn't have either. I really like the perspective. This is one of the dredges and gnomes. Originally, the dredges, you know, operated. There's the plankton RJ was talking about.
Look at that soup. That's what the whales were chasing.
Nice weather, nice warmer. There's the professor. I found out from the professor, he taught me a lot about the accordion was brought on the whaling ships to that Arctic in the 1800s, and the reason why is because they were so indestructible. And they're still around most of the villages that we were at had those accordions that all the people that played it. There's abnormal anomalies, they call them in the Arctic.
Yeah, go ahead. That looked like a polar bear. You can find every shape of ice.
Mary Sachs entrance, that's named after my great uncle Peter's boat, Mary Sachs, and that's up just before Texas Connect country there, up in oil country. We're there, Collison Point, and that's a beautiful sunrise. There's Bernard Harbor, Bernard Spit, just outside of Kakatoga, named after Peter Bernard. There's RJ's flight coming in the day left. There's a story about that. I'll tell you about something like that. Everybody had their fish drying on top of their house. But lack of seagulls. There was not one seagull that I seen. Did you in there?
No.
So maybe somebody's from Cordova would like to go up there. This is, if I'm not mistaken, Bob Pullman's in the house tonight too. His great-great-grandfather was up in the Arctic at about the same time. And he was Admiral Pullen. He was looking for the Lost Franklin expedition. And Bob's also had uncles up there in 1965, up to 1965 in the military. Cordova's not that big, but those guys in the Arctic, I don't know what it is. That's Pullen Island. I told Bob I'd take a picture. He was going to make the trip with me, but his due to health issues, he couldn't. That's his. This is the Whale Cliffs in Franklin Bay. Pretty amazing stuff. This is the Smoking Hills, which are the chart here. The Smoking Hills are at. This is as far as we made it. Now this is after RJ left me. It was just me and Paul that made it this far.
This is farther than, this is what, another 100 miles past what we were able to make first time before they ran into the ice again.
But the ice never left Banks Island where we were going. It was just wasting it.
Matter of fact, the folks that Bob was going to meet on Banks Island couldn't get off the island by boat. I mean, the whole island was iced in. There was no way we could make it.
So there's 2 minerals, I'm not sure what they were. We looked it up one time and the professor told us what they were, but they make these smoking hills. And as you see, they start smoking. And they go on for about 40 miles like this. And I can't understand why you live in the Arctic. Why wouldn't you live there where you had all that heat? Because you're nowhere around. Just me and Paul. This is Herschel Island. This is where the whaling station was, very famous whaling from the 1800s. When whaling ships were up there, they'd have over 200 whaling ships in different places at the time. But it was really foggy, we couldn't go ashore there. And that's all there was there. That's all there was in the Arctic, these whaling ships to come in. When we got into Kaktovik, we seen this grave over there. And it turns out that this grave belonged to a member of the Canadian Arctic Expedition that nobody knew at the time. And there he was, fifth section. Even the village of Kaktovik didn't know who this guy was. And he had this grave up for 100 years, but nobody knew who he was until we explained it to him. And I thought it quite interesting because I added his name to the plaque. His name was not on the original plaque. It was, I added the place of the resume. So that's where we put the plaques, that's where we left them for now. Figured that'd be fitting. And this is one of the reasons that RJ and myself have never really written any story or anything about this, because the story isn't over yet. Plaques are still there, we haven't delivered. I haven't delivered them, hopefully our will maybe will get to it.
So what's the fence behind the grave?
There's a seagull. Those are bear fences.
Polar bear?
Yes, they try to keep them at least in areas they can watch them, so it's not like the whole village is fenced, but at least it helps provide traffic control. Anybody wants to go to Kaktovik, it's only like $450 one way from Anchorage to see the polar bears. It's a phenomenal place. Go back to the pile of bones, Bob, the next one. That's why the polar bears come to Kaktovik. Whale pieces and parts.
What happened?
That washing machine, did you guys use it?
Professor Washington?
That's great. We hauled that goddamn, pardon me, washing machine, poured over to the Arctic. It was always in the way. I cussed that thing every time I had to work on deck. Bob said it would come in useful. I can't believe it. He washed a load of clothes.
He washed his lawn gear every day.
There you go.
There we go. Trace down this guy here.
Wow, you can hardly see.
I've blended in pretty well. I ran into a young fellow that took me out hunting, showed me how to hunt these things. They hunted with sticks. I couldn't even see it. I had a hard time seeing him. There he is. Give you an idea how much the erosion's happening up there. Everything's disappearing. The coastline is disappearing. This dog has run the Iditarod race 4 times. Partner, master there. There he is. I was supposed to throw the stick and get him because the other guy chasing at me, but I didn't prefer to do that. This is going back now. This is Cape Lisburn. You made the corner right there. Now this is heading down the Bering Straits. This is where I thought I had died. I thought I was going to die right here. This is really interesting. We got into weather in the middle of the night, and it blew hard, and the seas got big, and I got scared. And I just kept it on my stern going. And when daylight came about, looking at my chart, I figured I'd either end up in Japan in about a week, or I could get in behind an island called King Island and hopefully get some lake, which we did. This is King Island. And when I was a kid, I'd seen pictures of Uncle Joe had at King Island, but I didn't put it in perspective that this was it until the next morning when I woke up. The place is just kind of disappearing. It's not very big island. But if you look up on top of that, at coffee I yelled at Paul, "Paul, my God, there's a man standing on top of this island." And we got up and we looked at it. Paul did a little bit of research, a little bit of reading. That's a 12-foot statue of Jesus standing on top of that island.
Oh.
Yeah. And this is the village that they built on that island, so those people could drag that 12-foot statue of Jesus up the island.
And we think we're tough.
Well, the way I said, this is the whole island you're looking at right there, and the village is right in the middle of that picture, hard to see that picture, that's the whole island. And they lived out there until 1954 when they brought along, 1954. That's the whole island right there, the village.
They were musical about them, and it was Christmas.
Yes, it's a wonderful story. Yes, yes, the play, yes.
I remember seeing that picture, and when I was just a little kid, my uncle had it, I couldn't figure out why anybody would want to live on the side of the cliff. I still can't remember that to do. Right back to it.
So I think that's close to it. I'm going to provide just a couple of other little tidbits of perspective, and then you guys really should pick up a copy or get from the library, The Ice Master, a phenomenal story of courage and survival. But to give just a touch more background on Peter and Joe, they were Arctic traders, and they built a phenomenal little tiny Arctic sailing motorized boat. The oak ribs were like on 5-inch centers. There were no room between them basically. The thing was sheathed with 2 inches of cedar and then 2 inches of iron bark. It was designed to freeze in and thaw out. As Arctic traders, their task was to trade alcohol and tobacco for cultural items and religious items. And they were purchased by everything from the Smithsonian to the Vatican to private collectors. So that was their business, and they were phenomenally both famous for how good they were and how effective they were as seamen and explorers. They knew the territory like virtually no one else. Fascinating pair.
Yeah, they really were.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Wasn't much after this. We left King Island. It was 8 hours. We spent there 2 days. It was 8 hours over to Nome from here. We were Paul got off the boat. He had to go back to school. I spent another 2 months in Nome, gold mining, playing the gold mining business. And left the boat there in Nome. We're flying up next week to put it away a little better for this coming winter. And then hopefully next June or July, I'm going to go up back to Banks Island and finish the trip with blacks up here. And that's the end of that expedition.